Hi, my name is Mark, and in the last few videos we've focused much more on licks or soloing and improvising and stuff like that, and we haven't really touched on chords for a while. And even though when we think about playing the guitar, we usually think about those tasty blues licks, or those mad lad tapping skills. But if you've played guitar for a while, you've probably noticed that a big part of playing guitar is about playing chords. If you look at other instruments like saxophone players or flute players or violin players, they can't really play chords. Well, in the case of violin, maybe they can, but it's pretty hard because of the fretless thing. But in the case of guitar playing, not only can we play all of that crazy soloing stuff, but also play chords. And as you were probably able to see by the title and or thumbnail of this video, we're talking about jazz chords today. And we're talking about jazz chords because every time a C major comes up, if you play it in this position or this position or this position or whichever position it is, it's still the same three notes. And it can get a little bit boring, and in general, I think guitar players like to spice up things a little bit. So we tried to learn about jazz chords. I think the simpler way to do it is to grab the chord, let's say C major again, and we can add some extensions like doing the 7th maybe. Again, if you're not really sure about some of these chords, I done a video a while back actually, showing to you guys this particularly interesting, shall I call it interesting, pop song from the 90s, which if you learn it the way I suggest in that video, you can learn all the standard chord positions for jazz chords for the guitar. I'll leave that video in the card section right there. Again, go check it out if you aren't really comfortable with jazz chords, or at least the standard shapes. But as I was mentioning, many times we want to spice up our C major chord and make it a little bit more jazzy. We would add extensions like doing a C major 7 chord, or even like a C6-9, or even trying to add the 11th in there, or even the sharp 11th, 13. All of those extensions that you can add, and depending on how you'll do them, it will sound a little bit more jazzy. Like if you want to do a C6-9 and you do it like this, even though it doesn't sound bad at all, this one probably sounds a little bit more jazzy. And you have some tricks to find out which inversions work best and whatever, but that's not really what we're going to talk about in this video, because I actually think there's a better, you can call it fancier, but I think it's a more jazzier way to approach chord substitutions like this. And when I mean chord substitutions, I don't just mean like if you do like a tritone substitution. Even though it sounds cool, that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about stacking fourths. You may have heard about stacked fourths before, but trust me, you may not have done this before. At least not in the context I'm going to suggest. So let's give it a try. But before we do, I just want to say, please subscribe to my channel. As you're probably aware, YouTube acts a little bit weird. Even if you subscribe to the channel, those channel's videos may really not show up in your subscription box. And even if you ring the little notification bell thingy below, you still really will not be notified of that channel's content. So if you want to stay tuned to my videos, not only do I suggest subscribing and turning on all the notifications, but also follow me on social media. Not only do I post some exclusive stuff there, like improvise solos and jamming with bragging tracks, and generally wherever I'm up to at the moment, but I always post there about my videos. Links for usual suspects will be below, but in general at Guitar. And since you're down there, please consider leaving a like and share this video on social media, I'd highly appreciate it. But getting back to the video itself, let's take the most common jazz chord progression, I guess. Let's take the 2-5-1. Again, let's do it in the key of C major. Again, I've done videos talking about this before, which you can check out if you haven't already. They'll be in the card section again. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, if we're in the key of C major, again, a 2-5-1 just means that we're going to take note number 2, which again in the case of the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. The second note, C, D, it's a D, and the D chord in the key of C major is a D minor chord. So we would do a D minor chord. And the same thing with a 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's a G. And so we would do a G major chord, and the 1 would be the C, the root. So we would have this chord progression. And even though it doesn't really sound bad, it doesn't necessarily sound like jazz, right? Again, like we mentioned before, we can spice it up a little bit, like doing those 7th inversions. even though it sounds slightly more jazzy, it doesn't exactly sound a lot more jazzy, right? And again, we can add extensions like the 11th. And I guess that can make it a little bit more jazzy, but as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, we can do things a little bit differently. Again, before we talk about stacked fourths, we should probably talk about stacked thirds. I've talked about this before in my channel in some other videos, but again, let's take the key of C major. How do I know which chord relates to it? Well, I'll stack thirds. Again, if I take the C major chord, I'll take the C. Again, to do the C chord in the key of C major, I'll take the C. I'll take its third, 1, 2, 3, it's an E. Then I'll take the third of E, 1, 2, 3, in the key of C major, of course. And the third of E in the key of C major is that G. So the C chord has these three notes, C, E, and G. And again, we can keep doing that. The third of G is a B, 1, 2, 3. So you get a C major 7. And again, we can keep stacking thirds. The third of B would be a D, which is the 9th. So we would have some sort of chord like this. And we can keep adding extensions and we would have something like this. And if you think about it, those are all the extensions we were adding before when we talked about adding the 7th and the 9th or the 6th / the 13th. And as we talked about, most of these chords are built by stacking thirds. But we don't really need to stack thirds. We can stack fourths, which is actually a technique that many jazz musicians do when soloing and playing chords. Again, those of you who are jazz cats probably already know about this. But for those of us rocky, bluesy guitar players who are trying to add some different chords here and there, maybe it wasn't that obvious. And again, we have a couple of possibilities when stacking fourths. We can just do perfect fourths, like again, in the case of C, its fourth is F. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's a perfect fourth. If we add the perfect fourth to F, we would add a B flat. Again, the perfect fourth of B flat would be an E flat, and the perfect fourth of E flat would be like an A flat, doing this quartal harmony sort of a thing. And even though this chord is a chord built by stacking fourths, you may have noticed that a lot of these notes aren't in the C major scale, like the B flat isn't in the C major scale, the E flat isn't, and the A flat isn't as well. And again, I don't really want to get into specific music theory details like fancy names and stuff like that, but this is basically what we would call a perfect quartal chord, because all of the stacked fourths are perfect fourths. But again, since we're playing in the key of C major, we need to only use notes of the C major scale. So if we want to do a C chord with stacked fourths in the key of C major, we do the same process. We get the fourth of C, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's that F right there. So we already have the first two notes. And then we need to go to the F and get its fourth in the key of C major. So 1, 2, 3, 4, F, G, A, B. The fourth of F in the key of C major is that B. And we do the same thing for the other notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, we get that E. And the same thing for that E. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have a C chord in the key of C major with stacked fourths. Even though it can also be sort of correct to analyze this chord as maybe an F sharp 11. Again, because we can think about this chord as a C chord with stacked fourths in the key of C major, we can do this chord, or even this chord if you want to be fancy, anytime you have your regular C major chord, or C major 7 chord, whichever C chord it is, again supposing that we are in the C major scale. So again, in the case of the 251, I'll do one time with our regular C major 7, and then the quartal chord. You can definitely feel that as a chord it's much more tense than a regular C major 7 chord, and that is definitely a little bit jazzier and spicier than our regular C major 7. But like I say in all of these videos, it's something that you can definitely try to play on your own and see where it fits or not. And in the most, I wouldn't say absurd, but in the more radical approach, you can do this quartal thing in every chord. Again, the D minor chord, we can substitute the D minor by a D quartal chord in the key of C major. Just need to find the fourth of each note. I'll kind of rush through the process a little bit. For the D minor chord, we would have something like this. Or again, you can add the A below it. Again, these are notes D, G, C, F, and B. The G is the fourth of D. The C is the fourth of G. So again, if you think about it, we came from a D minor chord, or a D minor 7, and we ended up with this. Again, you can think about this chord as a fancy G major chord as well. And needless to say that you can do the same thing for the G major chord, or the G7 chord. You can take G and its fourth, and the fourth of that fourth, and you got this chord. And those of you who may be paying attention, you may be thinking to yourselves, isn't this G quartal thing the same as the C quartal thing? Well, yes it is, because don't forget that all of these notes are in the same scale, and when you stack fourths within a specific scale, you will repeat many of the notes. Again, because we're in the key of C major, the note C was in each chord. It was in our C quartal chord, again, because it's C. It was on our D as well. And it was, of course, in our G quartal chord. And even if you look at our D quartal chord, which seems to be in a different position, if you look at the notes of this chord, A, D, G, C, F, and B, we also have those notes here. We're just starting on a different note. G, C, F, B flat, E, and A. If we had more strings after the E string, after that A we would have an ID. And after that E we would have a G, which are the notes we're playing here. So now you may be thinking to yourself, well, but if I stack fourths, I just got this big chord, why should I use it? Because by substituting one of these chords by the quartal version, when I get to the next chord and I say, well, yeah, but that's the point. You'll definitely get some interesting sounds. Again, I'll do the 2-5-1 in our regular shapes, and then I'll do the quartal one. You'll still hear the chord progression. Again, as I mentioned before, that may or may not be the sound you're looking for. And because I just substituted all of those chords by their stacked fourths versions, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to substitute every single chord by its stacked fourths version. And just like I said in the beginning of the video, we're just scratching the surface here. Again, just like we can think of this chord as a C chord in the key of C major with stacked fourths, you can also think about it as that F sharp 11 chord, right? So next time you have an F sharp 11, or even in this position, you can substitute it by this. Or next time you have a G major chord or a G7 chord, you can substitute it for this chord. Like if you're playing, you can play. Again, it's probably a little bit more tense than the other extensions you can add. But it's definitely something that you can experiment with. And like I mentioned before, just because we're in the key of C major, and it sounds better to just stack fourths that are in the C major scale, you don't necessarily need to do it. For instance, a chord substitution that many people like to do is when it comes time for the G7 in the 2-5-1. They like to add a flat 13 or a sharp 5 to make the chord altered. It sort of gives you that melodic minor vibe that many people like to use. But as we mentioned before, just by stacking fourths in the key of C major, we don't really have access to that D sharp or that E flat. But again, we can take our regular stacked fourths chord and maybe alter it a little bit, doing that G altered flat 9. Thereby taking both concepts we're using. Again, stacking fourths, but then maybe adding some extension that weren't already in the chord. just by moving some things around. Again, if you take a look at our stacked fourths chord for the D minor chord, we have this chord. Well, we can do some other substitutions to it if you wanted to. We could perhaps take that F and substitute it for a D, doing a little bit of a suspension here and there. This is an inversion for a C9 chord, or a C major 7 add 9 chord. So again, next time you're playing over a 2-5-1, you can add this chord. It's definitely something that you can think about. Again, I'm not really saying that these are the proper jazz chords and that these are the chords that you need to use, but compared to our regular 7th chords, these definitely sound a hell lot more spicy and I think jazzier. And I shouldn't need to mention this, but you can take all of these stacked 4th chords and do all of the mannerisms you did before, like doing those little thrills here and there. Or even do bass lines like... Again, it was a little bit poorly played because some of these positions aren't really good for doing some of those higher extensions, like... It works fine here, but then on this one... It's a little bit odd to do something like this. But again, you don't necessarily need to do it exactly like this and in these situations. You should follow your ears and say, oh, okay, I think it sounds good here to do this chord, or maybe I should do this inversion here, or add the substitution here or there. If you don't really like the sound of it, or it's not the sound that you're looking for, don't really do it just because the guy on YouTube tells you to. That's not the point of this video. But again, I'd really like to know what you guys think. Did you agree? Did you not agree? Was there something I missed? Something I should have said? Is this something that you're actually going to try to do? And honestly, if you actually try to do any of this sort of stuff, if you can film yourself playing it and post it on Instagram and then tag me on it, because I'd really like to see and share what you guys can come up with. And like I mentioned before, just because these are what we call jazz chords, you don't really need to use them for jazz. You can use them for blues, rock, metal. You just need to find the best spot for them. Again, they're not really chords for every situation. Or at least I think. You may think differently. But yeah, I guess that's it. Again, thank you so very much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, turn on all the notifications. Follow me on social media and share this video on social media. I highly appreciate it. If you can, check out some of my other videos after this one. Not only do I do other videos like this, like guitar lesson stuff, not only chords, but like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I do some soloing and improvising and transcribing licks. I also do some other types of videos. For instance, I do songwriting and composing lessons. Again, not only showing you tips and tricks and how to apply music theory and chords and stuff like that, but I'm also doing this series where I compose a song and show you guys my process. I have this series bass tricks for guitar because for those who don't really know, I actually started out as a bass player and gigged around for a couple of years before I eventually moved on to guitar. So when I came on to my guitar playing, I guess I brought some things from my bass playing that maybe some of you who didn't really start out on bass either don't think about or don't think about consciously. So yeah, I guess it's pretty self-explanatory. If you didn't really start out on bass, go check it out. That's probably something you can learn from it. I also have this series called The 8, You Ask I Teach. Again, pretty boring, generic, and self-explanatory title, but as you can probably guess, in that series I pretty much teach anything you guys have in the comment section below, that is guitar or music related, of course. So if there's something you want me to talk about, just leave it in the comment section below with the hashtag #8. And again, even though it's not exactly lesson sort of stuff, I do this series called Guitar This Week, where I talk about things that happen in the guitar/music industry that I either think are interesting, funny, or discussion worthy. So as you can see, I already have a little bit of a back catalog that you can check out, and I would highly appreciate it if you could check it out. All of those playlists will be in the card section right there, and on the annotations of the end screen, which will be on in just a couple of seconds, so please stay tuned. But yeah, I guess that's it. All I can say now is I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful to you in any way possible. But yeah, for now, cheers!